most like important thing I think to think about is that we have our own agency, we have our own beliefs, our own dreams. I feel like a lot of times people from the West seem to not understand that we have our own agency, that not everything is about them and about their their own country. It's a conflict that has a history of centuries, like before United States was a thing, to be honest, right? So in that sense, I just wish people would see that as and respect our agency and us as people. That would be great.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of On the Edge with Philip Ittner. Our guest this week is Anastasiya Paraskevova, who is an aid worker out east. And for those of you who have seen prior episodes of our show, you'll know that I like to touch base with different locations around this rather large country, whether it is Zarina down in Kherson or the deputy mayor of Odessa. Now, Anastasiya, or Anna, is out in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city and very close to the Russian border. And I've been wanting to talk to somebody out there for quite some time. So it's great to be able to have her on and discuss how things are going out in Kharkiv. But additionally, recently, Anna made quite a splash on the Piers Morgan show, where she was a member of a panel that was sadly, as is so often the case, made up of people who were either woefully ignorant of the causes of this war and the situation here, or who were actively spreading lies and Russian propaganda. Well, Anna did a wonderful job of pushing back. So before we go to our chat, let's just take a look at a little snippet of her appearance.
Literally millions of people participated in Maidan. That is not a coup. That is not something you buy for Obama or Nuland cookies. I'm sorry to say, never received a single cookie yet.
Right. So they weren't about to tolerate this kind of dissent
propaganda
in the East. It's not Russian propaganda. I'm a Texan. I don't even read Russian or know what the Russians say about this stuff.
Oh,
this
sure,
is the history of the world.
I speak Russian. That's my...
That's
yes,
fine. Listen,
can I please interject with that?
Well, let me just say right here. Anytime anyone contradicts the party line on this, that's all anyone ever says is that this is Russian propaganda. But that's just a bunch of crap.
Because it is.
They're plagiarizing me.
You repeated it in
and
English.
I'm just speaking the truth.
Are you getting money or not? I'm just wondering,
break,
you know.
Lady.
At least they pay
See,
you.
that really is all you have, because you can't contradict any of my facts. So you have to come up with this nonsense.
I can contradict everything you said. I participated in Maidan.
No one in America cares about Russia at all, lady. Nobody in America cares about Russia. Back in the days of communism, there were communists that did.
Can I please have a word? This person spoke quite a bit. We gave him a rooper to repeat Russian talking points and lies, blatant lies. So, you know,
Okay, well, Scott, let Anna just respond to what you were saying, Scott. I'm interested to hear her response.
A lot of bullshit was said, so it's kind of difficult to counter everything. Well, nobody wants peace more than us. I live in a city that is bombed every day. You know, my father has been killed. So, of course, we want peace, but that depends on what that peace is. So, yeah, this war is not about you. I'm sad to say some things are not about America. This war is about our very long time, centuries-long oppressor trying to thrust us back under their control, and we didn't want that.
Anna, thank you so much for joining us. I've been aware of your work and your advocacy, and you're trying to be a strong voice in Ukraine for quite some time because, of course, we have a mutual friend in the form of Dylan Burns, who was on the show previously. But you really shook some stuff up recently on Piers Morgan, which was great to see. You defended Ukraine, and you kind of put Ukraine's position and of your average Ukrainian out there into the Western information sphere, but you were kind of, to my mind, and it was also exemplified on Piers Morgan a few weeks ago with another friend of the show, Jake Bro, who conflicted with the same idiot who I'm not even going to mention on Piers' panel. But it does seem that even on, and I'm glad to see that you were on Piers Morgan and Piers is talking about this topic. I'm happy to see it, but it seems that you guys are outnumbered. You know, voices, pro-Ukrainian voices, or indeed voices of Ukrainian people, real Ukrainian voices, seem to be minimized in Western media. Why is it so hard for us to get voices coming out of Ukraine into the Western information sphere, do you think?
That's actually really good question, because it's not on our end. The problem is not on our end, because as you probably know, Ukrainians are very up into talking. They're like want to scream about what happened, and to literally everyone that they see. As far as like foreigners go, I never had like a single, when you bring up journalists like to regular people, and they sometimes worry that people will be like shy or don't want to talk with them. It's not this situation. Like every Ukrainian runs straight to the journalist, straight to the person with the camera, and starts, going off. So it's not the lack of interest from Ukrainian people. I guess you could say English is a little bit of a problem, but there are plenty of people in Ukraine who, speak English decently well, and they can. So it's not that. I think it's just the straight up lack of interest in hearing from Ukraine, and honestly, like Eastern Europe in general. So it's not just like Ukraine. You would like say Georgia, for example, like Moldova or Romania. How many people you see like represent this part of the world? I personally don't see them at all. So in that sense, I don't know exactly why, but there seems to be a very big indifference, I'd say, towards actually hearing the voices of the people from this part of the world and their opinions on Russia, on NATO, on like all of that, on European Union,
and pushing back on Russian disinformation. Yeah, I know. I find it very frustrating personally. I mean, aside from what and you represented Ukraine very well on Piers Morgan, but then we have these other instances, like take for example Joe Rogan, who will have on anybody in the world who is willing to crap all over Ukraine and push forward Russian talking points like the Nazi issue or it was a CIA coup in 2014. I, like you, was on Maidan. I know that was not the truth. But why, what do you think might be the motivation for guys like Joe Rogan to not only not invite Ukrainian voices on, but when they're offered, like, was it Vitaly Klitschko?
Yeah, Klitschko
who made the offer to? We got radio silence from Joe Rogan. We see tenant media buying up voices like Tim Pool and Dave Rubin and pushing forward Russian voices. I wonder, how much do you think of it? And feel free to be as blunt as you want to be, because if you don't, I will. How much of it is laziness and the kind of like boredom with the story, or just like, like there are other stories in the world that media wants to pay attention to? And how much of it do you think it is actually willful misinformation, disinformation that is coming from the Kremlin? Do you think it's just Westerners don't care, or do you think that Moscow is purposefully manipulating them?
I think it's purposeful. It's malicious manipulation in a way, because sure, there are like people like public that does tend to lose a little bit of interest in things that couple months passes and people hop to the next topic. Also like Palestine Israel happens, which also like drifted people's attention, obviously. But that's like when you speak of regular people, just of like civilians, people like that, just regular people, they might be losing interest because of that, and because also a very poor coverage, honestly, of Ukraine by legacy media that don't really talk about anything with the dread it deserves. It's the biggest war like in Europe since World War II essentially. So but when it comes to like maliciousness, I think it's there. For example, with Joe Rogan, it's quite easy to say why, because Klitschko would be the person he would invite, like by all parameters, like a boxer, our sportsman fellow, like
Speaks
he's
perfect English. His brother is the mayor of the capital. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
A legendary person. Yeah, you would want Kuleba. Actually, I think expressed interest on going there. Even Zelensky
is a fellow cigar smoker, could go on and share a stogie.
Exactly. Yeah. And why would he say no? And his argument was like, "Oh, I don't want to go political." And then he invites like people who talk for an hour and a half about Russian positions and NATO and all of that. So that's not political. But inviting Ukrainians is political, apparently. So in that sense, it's easy. His audience is a lot of them are MAGA people. A lot of them are just straight up pro-Russian. A lot of them are isolationists. A lot of them are on that populist America first grind, so to speak. And he doesn't really want to aggravate his audience that much. Why would he? He would rather invite people that most of his audience agrees with. So this is like with Joe Rogan's quite simple. People are getting paid, obviously, as well. As you mentioned, Tenet mediating pool, that's like straight up millions of dollars a person was paid to say Ukraine is the enemy of the West, that video, right? So it's just when I saw that, I told my friend, my American friend, I think he's paid. I think he's getting money. I have no proof, but it smells like Russian money to me. And he was like, "Well, we gotta wait." Yeah, but it was true.
Once you see it, once you're able to notice it, it sticks out like a sore thumb when you kind of understand the talking points, the bulletin points that they've clearly been given by the Russians. The Nazis are everywhere in Ukraine.
All the classics.
All the classics. The Maidan was a CIA coup.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many other ones that pop to mind, but
NATO provoked, all of that,
NATO provoked, the NATO Eastern expansion, not understanding that Moscow has been terrorizing their neighbors for centuries. I mean, we could talk about all those things, but it's bad enough when I see people who push these points forward that that they're either useful idiots or they're actually getting paid by Moscow. That's bad enough. But then when you see guys like Cenk Uygur, who was also on that panel with you, who are just completely out of their depth. They don't know what they're talking about. They haven't done because I think, in my opinion, the Western media has really let down Ukraine. They're hardly in this city anymore. I mean, it should not lay to guys like me and Dylan and Jake Bro and as far as the Westerners, and there's a handful of others, and I apologize for not mentioning every one, but we shouldn't be the ones doing this. This should be, as you say, legacy media, guys with audiences of millions and millions. I know Jake has a very large audience, but it shouldn't lay down to us. And so when you see a guy like Cenk Uygur just kind of like placidly accepting these narratives, it has me deeply concerned. What can we do to change it, Anna?
Well, it's a little bit difficult for me to say since I'm not American, and it doesn't seem to be like it's up to me. But at the end of the day, you just have unfortunate, like for me, I was shocked when I started watching like American news media, just basically Russia Today in English. And allowing people like that. For example, if I wasn't on Piers Morgan, which props to him, obviously, for inviting me, but if I wasn't there, who would say that all of that you said is lies? There was no one there. Rob wouldn't, Cenk wouldn't, right? So up until General Clark, bless him, appeared
thank
at the
Thank goodness
end.
for General Clark, and thank goodness for Jake Bro on the 2 or 3 weeks earlier.
Yeah,
there are voices he lets on, and thankful, but they're in the
Piers
minority.
Pierce is not the biggest offender by far. He does invite at least opposition, so to speak. At least when it comes to Ukraine, Pierce himself is not like anti-Ukraine that much, in my opinion. But it's just in general, it's quite difficult. But I think you have a big problem in the United States. Like, as cringe as it sounds, like from a not American to say, but you have a big problem with the Russian media narratives, with Russia paid people, like actually paid people who are on a job doing Russian propaganda to brainwash American population. You have an insane amount of very curious politicians that are people like Tulsi Gabbard, who are Assadists, who are, Putin did nothing wrong type of people, right? So you have like a lot of people, very influential people at the top, who also pretend, for example, like Tim Pool, right? He positions himself, I'm independent. I'm like not controlled by like the Republicans or like Democrats. I'm an independent thinker. You're getting like my opinion. And what do we learn? That his opinion is Russian propaganda that he was paid for. So a lot of people in America seems to don't trust the official media, like legacy media. Whether they have good reasons for that or not, it's not up to me to judge. But it's unfortunate that they trust people like Tim Pool or Joe Rogan over the legacy media, although these people lie, these people are paid, and they also have even the bigger incentives to lie because nobody checks them. There are no like checks and balances or fact checking, anything like that. They can say whatever they want. It's their channels, they're independent, like, quote unquote media platform. So that is a big problem. And I think you see effects of that, unfortunately, in the United States, in the way people think, in the people vote as well. So I'd say,
and as somebody who worked for over 25 years in quote unquote legacy media, I mean, there's just not enough. I think the problem there is it's too expensive, and there's not enough of a profit margin for them because it's not an audience draw. And that's not just me being cynical. That's me coming from having worked inside the organizations themselves. So look, we could talk about media the whole hour, I am sure, but I always like to touch in with when I get the opportunity to talk to somebody from another city in this very large country. I mean, I check in with Odessa, I check in with Kherson, I have friends out in Lviv, Dnipro, I've got, but it's all I've been anxious and excited to talk to somebody out in Kharkiv, because I think Kharkiv is a very important city, and it's a city, by the way, that I do truly love. I have yet to find a city that I don't like in Ukraine, but Kharkiv is definitely one of my favorites. So I know you, being so close to the Russian border, you guys have been under a lot of pressure throughout the last, 2.5, 3 years during the full-scale invasion. How are you guys doing? How are things out in Kharkiv?
I mean, people here are pretty, tough, I'd say. Because, it's quite like a trivial thing to say, but it's true. People are quite used to it by now. So it's not like, we're getting like a couple bombs per day and then people are like, oh, well, everyone is just basically going about their day as usual. The only time you really get like nervous, I would say, is when it's very close. So it's sometimes when my area is bombed a lot by cub bombs, which is like, glide bombs from aviation planes. And I only get like slightly like spooked, I guess you could say, when it's like 3 minutes away from me. Then, yeah, I'm not like,
I'm a little bit spooked. Yeah, no, I get you. I get that. I get that in Kiev too. Even here, every Ukrainian in every city gets that. So, but you're right there on the border. But one of the things that I'm going to heap praise on your city, and is it a Kharkivite or Kharkivin? What would you call it in English?
I mean, in English, I don't know, like Kharkivite sounds like a disease of some sort. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly.
However you want to call them, however in English we would call a resident of Kharkiv. Yeah. I just want to tell my English-speaking audience, and you tell me if I misinterpreted the city, but I find Kharkiv, I equate it with a town like Pittsburgh in America, or Newcastle in England. These are industrial towns that work in steel. Kharkiv is a steel town. And there's something about a town where its primary industry is working in metal and forging metal and in that gives them this backbone. There's this strength to it. And then the other thing about Kharkiv that I find so lovable is that your civic pride. When the first time I was in Kharkiv, it was right after the liberation. It was right after the offensive where Kharkiv was kind of was liberated, and already there were crews out sweeping glass up, cleaning things up.
Yes, that's true. Yeah,
they had billboards. Other places. And in other wars that I've been to, they have billboards that celebrate soldiers or pilots or whatever. I go to Kharkiv the first time after liberation, and I'm seeing billboards celebrating, the janitors and the cleaners and the things like that. I mean, there's a really these two things combined, to my mind, make Kharkiv a very strong, powerful city, and I wonder if my impression of your city is accurate, or is there anything you'd like to add or alter in that description of your city?
I think you're very on point. We call it like Zalizobeton or like Zalizobetonni, which is like a reinforced concrete city. So we are like reinforced concrete. That's how we call ourselves.
We would call it rebar in English.
Yeah, something like that. So it's just it's like this. It's a very like kind of like a resilient stubbornness. Like I don't know if you can swear on your program or not.
Yeah, swear away.
You don't fuck with us kind of attitude, So yeah, it's just very. It was there always. To be honest, it's not just like the wartime thing, but it kind of like obviously got amplified by all the strife and all the struggle people experience because tends to happen sometimes. And yeah, you're right. We are very very impressed with our like with our fire people, with our rescue workers, with our like communication people, electricians who repair stuff like endlessly. I don't know how they do it. They just keep repairing things. We get bombed, electricity goes out. In 2 hours, they have repaired everything. I have no idea, like genuinely, how they do it. They also suffered tremendously in Kharkiv because of the double tap strategy Russians use, because they wait until they arrive and then they bomb again. And so many people, I personally like spoke with in the firefighters department and in the first responders, as you call them, all of them have lost a lot of people just because of that. And yeah, one of the stories that is actually like a little story that I find very inspiring was when we had a rule implemented when Kharkiv was extremely awfully shelled by artillery before counteroffensives happened, when the city was within the reach of Russian artillery. So we had like this rule implemented by the administration of the city that first responders can only arrive after like 20-30 minutes has passed to avoid the double tap. And that was awful in a sense that I understand why, because we had they have a very little amount of those people, and if all of them are dead, then the city is screwed, so to speak. But first responders were mad. They were so angry at this, and I spoke with them, and they were like, it's our job to defend, to protect lives. 20-30 minutes is way too much time. People will die in that time, right? People will be under rubble, in fire. We cannot wait that long. Even if we are getting bombed, we still have to be there like immediately, as soon as possible. And yeah, that was very moving that they were like so angry at that rule that was intended to protect them, essentially. So yeah. That's why we celebrate them so much.
The guys that I kind of struggle against, who are like all doom and gloom about, Russia's taking so much territory and they're going to take this and they're going to take that. They struggle to take a town the size of Avdiivka. And it costs them tens, if not hundreds, over 100,000 men to take these small towns out in Donbass. I mean, God forbid they try to take Kharkiv. I mean, Kharkiv is a fortress, and it's filled with this kind of attitude. So I don't think there's a chance in hell that the Russians are going to take Kharkiv. Even though you're right there on the border, I just think that the size of the city, the fact that it is built like a fortress, it's been reinforced. the cost to the Russians to try and take Kharkiv, I think, would be astronomical. So, just short answer, do you think there's any chance that Russia's going to take your city?
I honestly don't think so. The only thing I'm worried about is them coming closer to us again. So maybe taking like Kupiansk region again or something of that sort. And then we will be in the range of their artillery again, which would be a disastrous. They bomb us already with bombs and S-300 missiles from Belgrade quite a bit. So that's the thing I worry about. The thing I don't worry about them really like taking the city, essentially.
No, I think they'd have to destroy it before they could take it, which is not
true, yes.
beyond. I don't think that's beyond what Russia is, willing to do. But, I just think the resistance, and there's so kind of transitioning to another topic, but still kind of keeping that in mind. There's lots of talk about a ceasefire or some sort of negotiated peace. I have heard from many of my Ukrainian friends, and I myself have this concern as well, that unless there is a just peace or a just ceasefire that provides protections for Russia, you guys are going to be right on the front lines. If there is a ceasefire and it enables the Russians to come back 2, 5, 10 years later, whatever it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're going to be right on the front lines there. So how deeply concerned are you of a ceasefire that doesn't properly protect Ukraine, but only allows Russia time to regroup and come back again?
That's like my main concern, to be honest. It's like something I'm like extremely anxious about, as are many people, because of for example, many think Trump administration will sort of force us in terms of like a blackmail tactic. We don't give you anything. We prohibit European countries to give you anything, and unless you like essentially surrender, because many talks about the peace sound to Ukrainians as basically a surrender. And we all know how that plays out. For example, you don't look no further than Chechnya, for example. They failed in the forced war, right, with Chechnya, and then they made a peace deal, so to speak, and then they wiped their ass with that peace deal and attacked them again on the second war and won, because for that time period, they were, like you said, regrouping, reinforcing, producing weapons, while Chechnya was just simply licking its wounds and trying to, put together their city somehow, which is what we will be doing, right? And it puts us in a completely disastrous situations, and there are very little faith amongst Ukrainians, unfortunately, that anyone will help us any more than they helped us now, if that happens in the future. So yeah, people are pretty terrified, and also it's not we cannot just cede territory, we cannot just cede half the country to them with no guarantees of that are actually solid, because of like NATO. I don't know, maybe membership or something like that, which Russia will never agree to, obviously, right? So the whole idea is that we are not in NATO and they can attack us again, whether they want. So same with like Moldova or Georgia or like other countries that are not under the protections right now, right? So yeah, for that, it's a pretty terrible time.
But even in places like the Baltics, you see them creeping in with their... what they do is they do this whole Russian language thing. Like there are our ethnic Russians who live in Latvia and they're being abused, so we must go and help them, sort of thing. I mean, they use this excuse in Kharkiv,
all the time,
even.
Mm-hmm.
Or in Donbass. Well, they're Russian speakers, so they're ethnic Russians. So we have a responsibility to protect our poor. And it reminds me. Go to Donegal, go to Donegal in Ireland, and tell them that because they speak English that they're subjects of King Charles. How do you think that's going to go? So, I mean, the fact that Kharkiv is a mostly Russian-speaking city, it is not a Russian city. It is a Ukrainian city. It just happens to speak Russian predominantly. I mean, this is another narrative.
It was enforced, I must
imposed.
It was colonization. It was Russified. Half the country was Russified, and the Russification policy was quite strong from Russian side. For example, the part of the country that was occupied by, taken by Poland, they haven't been the language hasn't been as removed as it was in, parts of the country that were under further Russia. So yes, Russification is just something they did to us, and now they use as an argument to say they're defending Russian speakers like me, for example. I, spoke Russian my whole life. Obviously, I was born in Kharkiv. So we never, they use the same excuse on Abkhazia, Ossetia, and Georgia as well. They always come up with that sort of thing. It's their strategy, actually. For example, when in Holodomor, millions of people, of Ukrainians died, they primarily died in the east, right? And then they have been replaced by Russian settlers, essentially, who came here. And then you have this, we have a Russian group here to protect now. So that's just a blatant strategy.
Another perfect example of British colonization of Ireland and the potato famine.
Pretty much.
When the Irish died of the potato famine or fled to America, they sent a bunch of Scots over to. So it's just colonization by another term.
Yeah.
You brought up Western support briefly there. What is your assessment of how the West has been supportive or not supportive of Ukraine? Where are your criticisms, and where do you think things went right or have been going right when it comes to Western support for Ukraine?
Well, when it comes to initial 22 sort of situation, I think we received, significant amount of help from United States and from Europe. And I was extremely hyped back in the day, specifically because I didn't really believe they will help at all. I think it will be another 2014, or it will be another Georgia that everybody will just close their eyes to it and do nothing. That's kind of was so I was pleasantly surprised, specifically because my expectations were so low, I guess you could say. And there have been a lot of great attempts to really help us, but then it kind of went downhill from there in terms, specifically with the United States, with the almost a half a year plus, how many, 7 or 8 months with absolutely no aid, blocked by I believe the Republicans primarily, but still, when it comes to Biden's administration, for example, the limitations and restrictions on long-range attacks in Russia have been as a disastrous policy that led to multiple cities completely destroyed. So it's just, never mind, our lives were horrendous because they were throwing bombs from planes, and we couldn't attack their aviation bases. We couldn't attack their planes at all. We couldn't attack neither the Arrow nor the Archer. So it was just, lay down and take it, essentially. In that sense, it's pretty horrible, I would say. Especially, I personally have a very big bone to pick with them not only giving us weapons long range, but also pressuring other countries not to give us allowance. For example, UK and their Storm Shadow missiles, right? They wanted to give us permission to use them in deep in Russia, and America was like, no, you're not gonna do it. Escalation, right? And it's just also now Biden, unfortunately, not Democrats lost the election, Trump, and now they're like, yeah, do it. They could have done it a year ago, if not earlier, but they didn't do it because I think personally, it's just my opinion, but I think they were afraid it would negatively affect their electability because so many people are, against help to Ukraine. Isolationism is on the rise, unfortunately, in the United States. And I would say that, unfortunately for us, it was kind of the sacrifice they made, but it didn't pay out because they still lost. So,
yeah. I've said the exact same thing many times, so I'm happy to hear that I'm not the only one who had that mentality. I think that they were afraid that if they did something and it escalated, escalation is all this talk of we're afraid of escalation, not only because of escalation itself, but also to give political capital to Trump. So they were afraid of Trump would use it on the campaign trail. Well, as we say in English, hindsight is 20/20. Trump won anyhow. So why you could have done it, months ago. But anyhow, this is what happened. So what can you do? Look, this is a difficult question, and it borders on personal, on something personal. I lost a very dear friend in this war. He's a journalist friend of mine, and he was killed at the beginning of the war. And I'm still processing that grief. So you decide how open you want to be about this. You could talk about it in a big term, because there's no Ukrainian who has not been affected or lost someone in this war. I'm not Ukrainian, but I lost somebody in this war. You've had some real tough blows during this war, I know. Talk to me a little bit, again, if you want to make it personal, fine. If you want to talk about big picture, every Ukrainian is suffering. But tell me about what it's like to be Ukrainian and what the Russians are doing to you, to your country, to your neighbors, your loved ones. What's Russia doing?
Well, it's kind of like a complicated, like I said, question, but to say it in a like simplest of terms, they turned the lives of me, my family, my friends, my people in general as Ukrainians, right, in a nightmare, like in absolute terror. Like that is endless 24/7 pretty much. So I personally lost my father. He was killed. I lost a lot of friends who I work with on the front, who have like a good chunk, like half of people I actively spoke to as a volunteer are dead now. So because of that, it's kind of hard to even describe the amount of damage of never mind the homes that were ruined, the people have been I just, it still hurts me to see like those especially old people who are like, 50 years I worked like on a factory to build this house with my own hands, and now it's gone. It's hard to it's hard to even explain just how destructive that is to people's lives, to people's future, to people's people put their whole lives to make Ukraine better, make it more beautiful, make it more prosperous, to make it to have decent lives essentially. That's just very normal desire to have decent life, and that's what we kind of worked so hard to get. Whether it was revolution, whether it was just hard work, whatever your input as a Ukrainian, I guess, was in the betterment of this country, right? Everyone paid it now, and it's just there is this song of Ukrainian musician who says the freedom of price is very costly, and that cost rises every day. And that's very true, because that the price is just keeps on, rising. And it's kind of silly to think about that way. But if you read old literature, Ukrainian, right, of Ukrainian authors who describe their struggles against Russian imperialism, against Russian subjugation, whether it was serfdom or whether it was Holodomor and, Soviet Union occupation and all that, it's exactly the same struggle. So I relate to people who were 300 years ago or 200 years ago or 100 years ago, right? Because they are talking about the exact same things, and they're fighting for the exact same values. And that's sad, genuinely, for me, that people in 21st century in my country are having the exact same struggle that people centuries ago had, right? It's not right. But that's how it is, I suppose, in our life. I want a generation of Ukrainians that doesn't die, in brutal ways. That would be cool.
There is generational trauma in this country because of the Russians. And my condolences to you on the loss of your father. I know.
Thank you. Same for your friend,
I know what that's like, and it sucks.
Yep.
And fuck the Russians.
Yep. True.
And this is something that also when I hear Russians speaking, and that's not just in mass media, but it's I have Russian friends. I lived in Moscow, and some of them have been, they're Z, or they believe the propaganda, the Z movement that kind of Putin has led, this nationalist, fascist movement in Russia. They genuinely do not understand that these two countries will never be friends again. There has been too much blood spilt, in my opinion. But let me ask you, Ukrainian, do you see a time ever again when Russians and Ukrainians will, I don't want to say have, brotherly relations, or even just friendly relations, after all of the trauma and the pain that's been inflicted, over the centuries, but certainly in the last 3 years?
I could say this, like half my family actually from my mom's side lives in Russia. So unfortunate
There
for
you
me,
go.
like most of my family actually lives there. I no longer speak with them pretty much, aside from one cool uncle who's very good, who's a very, very awesome dude. But he's like an exception,
Occasionally you find,
unfortunately.
no, it's not
Yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
absolute. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's that one unironically good Russian, I know. But point is that it's the only way. It's going to be a little bit of a brutal answer, but I'm sorry for that. But it's the only way they can actually make us forget and forgive is if they kill enough people, and then the future generations will grow up under their propaganda. That's the only way they can do it, and that's the way they did it before. So there have been generations of Ukrainians who have been conformist, who have been killed off so substantively that they just gave up. And it's not their fault, people can't fight like for a million years. And they have been propagandized to believe that Russia is actually a good and benevolent older brother. It was a farce, but people, many people believed that. And Ukrainians
It's
are also very
colonization.
yeah, many people are forgiven in Ukraine in general. Many people who even had like very sordid opinion of the past before their full-scale invasion, right? They were like, well, it's in the past, it's different now, we can move on, we can just be, have a partner kind of relationship with Russia. But you cannot, because they don't see us as equal partner, and they never did, and they never will, it seems, unless something substantially changes. They will always see us as their subject, as their property, as something they can do anything they want with. And unless that changes in Russia, I don't see any sort of reconciliation unless they actually like do their typical strategy of brutalizing the people to the point that they are becoming conformist. But that might happen if we lose. Actually, it's possible. But yeah.
Yeah, but short of that, I don't
change.
see it happening for generations. I think
Yeah,
too much
Russia
blood
needs
has
to
been
change.
shed.
Russia needs to change, and they need to understand and accept their, like many people in the West obviously are not perfect, but you cannot deny that people have rethought a lot of their like colonial policy and don't see it anymore as something to be like super proud of or super great or anything like that, right? There have been a lot of like educational attempts in the West to speak about the people they have oppressed, people they have like colonized, like nothing like that happened in Russia. They still see themselves as glorious, great liberators that only did good and never did anything bad. And with that attitude, there's no reconciliation. People ask me, can you forgive them? They're not asking for forgiveness. There's nothing to forgive. They're not asking me for forgiveness. So yeah, that's there needs to be
They have
a
to look
change.
they have to look in the mirror. In my opinion, they have to look in the mirror, recognize the sins that they have committed.
Yes. Yeah, to move on, you have to
and
recognize those things.
yeah. So last two questions for you, because I don't want to keep you forever, but just blanketly looking into your crystal ball, what's the future look like for you? What's the best scenario? What's your most fearful, worst scenario? There's a new administration coming in. Trump is notoriously friendly with Putin and all the rest of it, but what's the best case scenario for the future, and what's the worst in your opinion?
Future is really, I told this before to people, but future is really not something I think about that much. I'm like, most people live in the now and maybe in the tomorrow, So everyone is like kind of living in the moment right now, because, there's a lot of struggle, but also thinking about the future is a little bit scary. Not gonna, so people avoid that. But if I would use the crystal ball and, try to see something in it, I would say that the best case scenario, of course, as dreamy as it may seem, is a liberation of my country and fall of the Russian dominance and Russian regime, and some sort of actual accountability for their crimes for once in history. And I would say that's the best scenario: the liberation of the Ukraine, but also the Eastern Europe in general from Russia, because I do consider us technically their hostages. So people like Moldova and Georgia, people like that, will live like hostages. So unless we do what they want us to do, we are faced with brutality. and it's have been a pattern, like, with not just with Ukraine, with many countries, right? And my ideal future is a future for Eastern Europe and Ukraine that is not kept hostage by Russia, that is not threatened by Russia, that is not killed by Russia. So that's the best case scenario. Some justice would be good, some justice would be nice. And yeah, I want future Ukrainians to have decent lives. I want to have them to have liberty, to have democracy, to have more, to live wealthier than we do now, all of that. But most of all, I want just them to be fucking free. It's basic, but it's what I want. The worst case scenario is us. Honestly, I can't imagine anything worse than all of this being for nothing. Like, I read sometimes the stories of previous generations and how they were like, we are going to be the one to break the will. We are the one who going to, stop their end, and they failed. And they failed
Ivan
because
Franco, the stonecutters.
Pretty much, yeah. So many people, many groups tried their fucking best and they failed because of just how enormous the enemy is, right, compared to us, and how difficult this fight is. And as heroic as I find their effort, I am also afraid that we are also another generation like that, another generation of people who dreamt big and who tried their best and might still fail. And that's my biggest fear, and that's something I am quite worried about. And I don't want the lost lives of my friends to be for nothing. I want it to be for something, for the future they fought that they will never see, but the future they gave their lives for is the future I described as the good one, right? Not as the bad one.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably my best answer.
As somebody who lives here now and has been coming here for 25 years, I think you have the best chance you've had in centuries to finally get rid of this thing, of Moscow's boot on your neck. As we wrap up here, you are a great voice for Ukraine. My platform is not exactly Piers Morgan, but I want to give you the opportunity to something that Western media, I guess, is failing badly on. What message would you send to my audience, to an English-speaking audience, that they need to understand about this war in Ukraine and who, what is Ukraine fighting for? You did it quite well there, but if I give you a full platform here, just what message do you want to send to my audience?
I did say quite a lot of the explanation of what Ukraine is fighting for just now, and I would say if you're speaking to a lot of Western people, for example, who continue to support us, who talk about us, who donate, all of my volunteer work is primarily donated by foreign people from Europe, from United States, right? And I think they're doing their absolute best, to be honest. I can't say the same about politicians and governments, unfortunately, but the most important thing I think to think about is that we have our own agency. We have our own beliefs, our own dreams as people, just like you are. Nobody is that different, to be honest, right? Every group of people have their own the soul of the nation, so to speak, right? And their beliefs, their dreams. And I feel a lot of times it applies to many people, but Eastern Europe as well, that people from the West seem to not understand that we have our own agency, that not everything is about them and about their own country. It's a conflict that has a history of centuries, before United States was a thing, to be honest, right? So in that sense, I just wish people would see that and respect our agency and us as people. That would be great. And many people do. to be fair, not everyone is disrespectful of our agency, as I mentioned, but I encountered that a lot, and that upsets me, because it seems like you're not allowed to be a fully fledged person for some reason. If you are from this part of the world, you're just like a little pawn between big games, between big countries for some reason. And that's true in a way. We are in between big players, obviously, right? I'm not going to deny that, but that doesn't mean we don't have our own our own sense of self and our own sense of what we want and what we are willing to fight for. And the last thing I would say is it is important to support this Ukraine, because Ukraine is now the shield that defends so many other people from Russian aggression. And maybe you believe they will not attack NATO countries. It's a decent belief. I understand why you would think that. But there are other countries. There are Moldova, there is Georgia, there is, Kazakhstan, there is like Armenia,
Millions
there is,
of
millions of people whose lives are at stake, who are, like I said, hostages. And I would not be so sure, if I were you, that when Russia manages to get all of us and then use us as conscripts to move further, that it wouldn't happen, that they wouldn't attack Poland with all the good old meat cannon people they now have to use, right? It's pretty. We need to stop World War III. I agree with that, but not by appeasement, not by escalation management, but by actually stopping it before it reaches this phase that it reached with Hitler. There are countries like Iran, China, countries like that are also in part of this fucking axis, as people say, axis of evil. And it's not a joke, because the spirit, the smell of World War III is in the air, and you're not wrong for smelling it, but you're wrong with your conclusions, I believe, often, that appeasing those people will somehow prevent it, which it never did historically. So
no, I agree, and I think also if they do succeed in Ukraine, and if they do succeed in, Moldova or Georgia, it may not be tanks that they send, but when they're emboldened, they will seep into Europe, and they will do it by other means. Because they will push their. But the last thing I'd like to just say is you also touched on another reason why I was so excited to bring you on and speak with you, is because when you were on that panel with Piers, you made a very blunt point, and it was wonderful to hear. It's not all about you guys. Not everything that happens.
Couldn't help
Not
myself.
everything that happens on the planet is because, or it directly involves the United States. Now it does, certainly, because we're in a partnership. But there is agency here, and Moscow is responsible for this war, not anybody else. This is Vladimir Putin's war. America thinks it's the center of gravity, and everything that happens on the planet is because of them. But as an American who has lived abroad for as many years as I have, sometimes it's about actors who are taking agency of their own. So that was a wonderful point that you made on Piers, and I'm happy to have had you on today to express that idea and so much more. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Anna. We will stay in touch. If you ever want to come back on, you have an open invitation. Kharkiv is one of my favorite cities. Please stay safe out there. As safe as any of us can in Ukraine. All of us are at risk. There's just no getting away from it. But I know Kharkiv has had it bad in the past. So I am glad to have you as a voice, not only from Ukraine, but from Kharkiv. So, Anna, I just want to tell you I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on, and please keep doing what you're doing, and we will include any link or any project or anything you would like to either get the message out or to keep sustainability for aid. All you have to do is ask. So thank you so very much for coming on our show.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on. It was a lovely time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Anna.